Welcome to the Seaside Sustainability Podcast, where we dive into the intersection of science, sustainability, and education. Over the past few years, we've seen a surge in environmental education and science jobs, driven by the growing urgency of addressing climate change, biodiversity loss, and environmental degradation. As industries, governments, and communities increasingly prioritize sustainability, new opportunities are emerging for professionals in fields ranging from policy and research to education and green technologies. Today, we'll explore how this shift is reshaping the workforce and creating exciting new roles for those passionate about protecting our planet. Stay tuned as we talk to an expert on marine science, share insights, and look at how the demand for environmental science and education jobs is opening up a whole new world of possibilities. Long before the rise of today's sustainability-driven economy, environmental professionals were already hard at work in roles like environmental scientists, wildlife biologists, park rangers, and even waste management experts. From managing forests to protecting marine life, these early pioneers laid the foundation for the growing demand for green jobs today. Over the years, tech has revolutionized everything from data collection to disaster response, making environmental work smarter, faster, and more impactful. For example, remote sensing tools like satellites and drones are now giving scientists the ability to monitor global environmental changes in real time. Meanwhile, innovations in big data and machine learning are helping professionals predict climate trends and assess risks more accurately than ever before. And when it comes to renewable energy, we're seeing cutting-edge developments in solar panels, wind turbines, and energy storage, creating entire industries around clean, sustainable energy. On top of that, environmental educators are now using virtual reality to offer immersive experiences, and smart technology is helping optimize everything from agriculture to waste management. It's clear that technology is not just changing the way we do environmental work, it's opening up entirely new career paths and opportunities. There's nobody better to help us understand this new world of environmental possibilities than Dr. John Cigliano, who is Seaside Sustainability's Marine Science and Technology Advisor. And now I want to welcome Dr. John. Dr. John, how are you today?
Good. I'm doing fine. How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you. Where in the world are you located?
Rockport, Massachusetts.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. How's the
Yeah,
weather like there?
cold.
Yeah, there's a cold front going through the east, right?
Yeah, it's been cold for a while now, but that's what you expect that living in Massachusetts.
Of
So
course.
it's fine.
Nice. So I'm wondering if you can tell us, if we can get started, tell us a little bit
Hmm.
about your background and how you got into
Sure.
marine science.
Sure. So I got into marine science really when I was a kid. I grew up on Long Island in New York, spent a lot of time in the Great South Bay. I watched a lot of Jacques Cousteau, and I just fell in love with the ocean. And then as an undergraduate, I was lucky enough to spend a semester at a marine lab in the Virgin Islands. And from there, I decided that I wanted to become a marine biologist and went on to get my PhD at Boston University. However, when I was at BU, I really started to see and understand all of the threats that were affecting the ocean. So I did a kind of a slight pivot after I graduated and decided to really devote the rest of my life doing marine conservation. And that's what I've been doing for, about 30 years now.
That's amazing. And what
Hmm.
does that marine conservation, working in that field, what does that entail?
Well, conservation in general is trying to understand the threats that are affecting ecosystems, habitats, and species, and developing plans, interventions, strategies to preserve ecosystems, habitats, and species. And my focus has always been on marine conservation. So looking at various threats. I'm trying to understand them, trying to figure out ways to mitigate those threats or to manage species and populations. So over my career, uh, I've worked on various topics, including conservation of marine fisheries, ocean acidification and warming, microplastics. And now what I've done a little bit of another pivot in my career. I retired recently from academia because I wanted to focus on local and regional issues. And that is what led me to Seaside Sustainability.
Yes, it's funny you mentioned that. In our last episode, we did talk to Lexi Davidson, who
Hmm.
does a lot of like the local outreach. What do you think
Hmm.
are some of the challenges that you see when you're trying to work with local organizations?
Well, challenges, I mean, it's kind of the same challenges you might find working in general with local communities and stakeholders. Everyone has their own, you know, conservation affects people differently depending on whether they're a community member or a fisher or a governmental, someone who works for the government. So probably the most difficult thing in conservation is really getting the buy-in from local stakeholders. And that's why outreach is so important. I mean, we know the science, we have a pretty good idea what we need to do to perfect, for example, protect fishery stocks. But getting local buy-in and also doing it in an ethical way. Conservation is not about keeping people from fishing or using natural resources. It's all about making sure that the resources are used in a way that's sustainable and that protects species and habitats and ecosystems. So, working with local communities, doing it in a way that works for them and works for the natural resources, doing it in an ethical way, that's probably the most difficult part of conservation.
What would you say, working with the people in these communities? I'm guessing hearing their stories, hearing their worries. What would
Mhm.
you say are some of the effects that they are seeing and the effects that they are worried about?
Fishers certainly are worried about the declining fish stocks. It's harder and harder to make a living as a fisher. A lot of stocks are in decline, so they're worried about that. But they certainly are worried about any strategies that may be imposed to preserve those fisheries, how that may affect their livelihoods. And for local community members certainly are concerned about the effects of climate change on everyday lives. We're seeing that in real time now with how the climate has been changing. You know, California, of course, is seeing that unfortunately, in
Fires.
spectacular ways with those fires.
Yeah.
But we're seeing it also here in New England in, marine ecosystems the lowering with ocean acidification, which is a reduction of pH in the oceans. The oceans are warming. Sea level is rising. We're seeing lots of flooding. So these issues are affecting people in very different ways. And of course, they have their own concerns depending on uh, whether they're a community member, whether they're a fisher. So there's a lot of different ways that these issues are affecting people.
Totally. I'm currently in Los Angeles and it's been
Okay,
a
so yeah,
crazy
you know
couple of weeks.
firsthand. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Definitely climate change is, it has a part in everything.
Hmm.
I'm wondering, obviously we are seeing the effects in real time. How do you feel like your job as a marine scientist has changed from when you first started to
Hmm.
now, seeing the effects of climate change, but also with, new technologies and new opportunities?
Sure. Probably the biggest change in the conservation field, and this is certainly affecting me, but I think it's general to the discipline. When I first started in conservation in the early 90s, it was all about doing the research. figuring out what's going on, figuring out the solutions. Of course, first figuring out what the problems were, but coming up with the solutions. And then we all thought that the science would speak for itself. But over time, we realized that what's really most important in conservation is the outreach, is working with community members, with making sure that everyone understands the issues and the solutions, and working with local community members to develop those solutions and enact those solutions. So. Um, I'm a natural scientist, I'm an ecologist, and early on it was all about ecology. But now, really, in conservation, the social sciences has really taken a lead in conservation because of the need to not only work with local communities, but really, we need to understand the concerns that of local communities, of local stakeholders. So the social sciences, I think, have taken a larger and larger role in conservation over the last 20 years.
That's very interesting. You were mentioning earlier before we started recording a little bit about the citizen scientist program. I was
Mm-hmm.
wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so citizen science, it goes by several different names: citizen science, participatory science. And what this is really just engaging the public in scientific research, in real scientific research. There is a certainly an outreach and education component to working with local community members, non-scientists, in in doing scientific research. But for citizen science or participatory science, the defining characteristic is that the community works with scientists on actual scientific research projects. So to generate actionable data that can be used, if you're doing it for conservation, can be used to help develop management plans, for example. Um, so I have worked with scientists throughout my entire career, and I still do. And I do that for two reasons. One, I really enjoy working with community members and school kids and teachers and folks who are not professional scientists, but really have a passion for science and passion for conservation. But also, I think it's a great way to get the public involved in conservation. They in this way they not only see firsthand what the problems are and what the solutions can be, but they also become empowered, really part of the scientific process, and they become part of the conservation of natural resources. And certainly the more folks we get involved with conserving natural resources, the more folks that become engaged with the research and understand what the problems are and become empowered to work on conservation and environmental issues on their own, certainly the better will be. Because ultimately, the science is useless if there's no buy-in from stakeholders and government organizations, which is why I continue to work with citizen scientists, and why when I retired and moved back to Massachusetts and moved to Rockport, really started to seek out local nonprofit organizations because I wanted to work with them because they work directly with local communities. And I think that's really the only way we're going to affect change is if we get local communities engaged in conservation work.
That is really true, and I really commend you for doing that work. I think oftentimes climate change can see like this huge problem
Hmm.
that is just so you know, looming and unachievable, right? And I think when you can bring it down to the local level and see
Hmm.
in your own local community, it gives you hope, right?
Yeah,
And I think
that's right.
in that essence of hope, I'm wondering what changes do you see happening in the next 20 and 30 years? Or what changes are you excited for that you think will help us be better?
Sure. I just think my hope, it's hard, it's always, of course, hard to predict the future where we're going, but there truly is a growing movement with younger generations, your generation and even younger. And I think that gives us hope that there are younger generations are not just throwing up their hands and saying it's over. So that gives me hope, and I see more and more people becoming interested and knowledgeable about the environmental issues that affect us. Um, and so that gives me hope. So it's really more of the same, but but more of the same that's growing. The younger generations becoming involved and looking to affect change. I mean, technology certainly plays a big part in this, but I don't want to put all our hope into technology. Uh, I think we can fall into the trap that technology will save us,
Hmm.
and technology will certainly help, but it's not, we can't sit back and allow technology just to, just going to let the techs, come out, we're going to have these great inventions that are going to save us. We can't fall into the trap. Now, that being said, looking to how renewable energy technology is advancing is very helpful, especially for climate change. Carbon capture technology is advancing. So there is also glimmers of hope on the technology side, but I still would prefer to to rely more on us rather than just waiting for the magic bullet.
Yeah, and I think that that's a beautiful way to end this interview, right?
Hmm.
That we have the power, right? We have the
Hmm.
power, and starting at the local level is something that is attainable and something that
Hmm.
will create change.
Yeah, we know what needs to be done, and I'm not, of course, not the only one who's has said this. I know the first one to say this. We know what needs to be done. We know what we have to do to deal with the largest environmental issues that are affecting us. So, in a way, that's very hopeful because if we know the solutions are out there. We just have to find the will to follow through and make those changes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. John, for meeting with us today and
Oh,
for
my
letting us
pleasure.
pick your brain. This was amazing.
Sure, my pleasure. It was a lot of fun.
Seaside Sustainability is based out of Massachusetts, but we recruit interns from all over the world to participate in our programs and initiatives. America is not the only place experiencing an increase in environmental education and science jobs. Let's take a look at some other places where the field is developing. The European Union member states, France and Germany, for example, have set ambitious goals regarding carbon neutrality and renewable energy, which has created an increase in green based jobs. Canada similarly has invested largely into clean energy and green technologies. Countries like Japan and India have developed industries focused on disaster resilience and recovery, as they are both vulnerable nations to the impacts of climate change. Kenya, Chile, and Mexico have all been identified as leading countries in renewable energy sources, particularly in their focus on solar energy. All these countries' focus on clean energy, reduced carbon emissions, and disaster resilience have an effect on their job markets. All of these places have seen an increase in job opportunities in environmental research, technology, consulting, and policy. This is an important step for cultivating a sustainable society. So, what do all these goals and jobs mean for our future? Not only does an increase in green jobs spark innovation and inspire new technologies, it helps mold our society into a sustainable place. As these sectors grow, like clean energy and research, they can reduce societal reliance on fossil fuels, helping to reduce the emissions of fossil fuels from major industries. Research and consultation jobs are an important piece of the puzzle towards developing sustainable practices within industries, providing the proper steps and outlines. This increase of environmentally based jobs contributes largely to the economy as well. Job creation is a great example of this in all of the places described prior. Green jobs not only support environmental goals, but also stimulate economic growth and change, promoting long-term sustainability. Thank you for tuning in to the Seaside Sustainability Podcast. Make sure to check out our Instagram at SeeUsInc, as well as signing up for our newsletter. Take care, and you'll hear from us soon.